Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on understanding and managing Scope 3 emissions. I'm Shiv, Sustainability Marketing Manager at Olive Gaea, and it's an honor to have you join us as we delve into the crucial topic of greenhouse gas emissions management and the journey towards net zero. Before we start, let us cover some quick housekeeping rules to ensure a great experience for everyone involved. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section that you see on your screen. If you're wondering about any of the slides that you may miss, don't worry, we'll definitely be emailing them to all the attendees in due time. And we would just want you to focus on whatever slide is there, so you can always follow up. If you need help at any point or have immediate concerns, just use our chat function. Our team is on standby to assist you. Raghu, if you can move to the next slide. Yeah. So this webinar is part of our ongoing series to provide businesses with insights, tools, and strategies for sustainable growth and compliance. This is our third webinar in the series. The first two were based on creating a foundational knowledge about how to approach carbon footprint assessment for businesses. So today's webinar is on understanding and managing Scope 3 emissions. Today we have Raghu with us, who is a carbon emission specialist here at Olive Gaea, and we are also joined by Jessica Scopacasa, who's co-founder and CMO of Olive Gaea. So just to have a quick overview of the webinar, we are going to start with a quick recap of what we discussed in webinar 1 and 2. And from there, we are going to start talking about Scope 3 emissions. What's the problem statement that is there in the industry currently, and why is it really important to account for the challenges which are present in managing Scope 3 emissions, and also look towards some solutions. And with that, I would want to give this over to Jessica to start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shiv, and hello everyone. I'd like to also extend my warm welcome to today's webinar on understanding and managing Scope 3 emissions. Before we delve into today's topic with the help of Raghu, let's just briefly recap our previous webinars. So in our first webinar, we explored navigating carbon footprint assessment for businesses, which basically helped us set the scene for carbon footprint calculation. We focus very much on understanding the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the master document that guides corporates in their carbon footprint accounting. And we then cover the process outline from baseline setting to achieving net zero emissions. If you have missed that or any other previous webinar, you can find the recording on our YouTube channels, or very simply just drop us an email. You can request the slides from us directly. We'll be super happy to share them with you. Our second webinar focused on managing greenhouse gas emissions. So basically what to do once the initial calculation is done. Now, this is where we discussed emission projections, the target setting, different decarbonization levers, and also the importance of strategic planning and budgeting. At the same time, we started introducing the Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, which launched the world's first net zero standard approximately 3 years ago, providing one of the most highly regarded framework for companies to set targets in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So delving into today's topic, Raghu, if you can just move the slide, please. Now, we know that probably the most challenging of the 3 scopes of emissions is Scope 3 emissions, which are indirect emissions. These are really the result of activities from assets that are not owned or controlled by the reporting organization, but that an organization indirectly affects in its value chain. So whoever started looking into greenhouse gas emissions management knows very well that there are a number of challenges in both the measurement, but also in the reduction process. And this is particularly true when it comes to Scope 3 emissions. So we have given you here a few numbers just to prove this. Generally speaking, according to a BCG report, today 91% of companies fail to measure their emissions accurately. Reasons for this are multifold, but definitely Scope 3 emissions play a major role in this. Today, 66% of companies do not report Scope 3 emissions due to challenges in calculation. So they find it very complex still to measure Scope 3 emissions. And this is why they often stop at Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in their greenhouse gas accounting processes. And then again, it's not just a challenge in terms of calculations. 78% of companies face challenges in addressing their Scope 3 emissions. So basically in reducing these emissions happening across their value chain. So let's see why companies really need to address these emissions. Thank you. As we said, so Scope 3 emissions are the result of activities from assets that are neither owned or directly controlled by the reporting organization, but that the organization has an indirect way of affecting across its value chain, be it upstream or downstream. So why it is crucial to calculate and reduce these emissions? First of all, Scope 3 emissions are critical because they account for a very, very substantial portion of global greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 3 emissions usually constitute or approximately constitute 70% of the total emissions globally. So you can understand that without addressing this, it is going to be very, very complex to reach, the Paris Agreement targets and limit global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. However, as you can see in this chart, the percentage can really vary significantly depending on the industry or sector. So we can say that in general, industries which are producers of raw materials have higher Scope 1 emissions, while as we move toward those catering to the end consumers, these have typically the higher portion of Scope 3 emissions. So as you can see here, in industries like cement production, Scope 1 direct emissions typically represent the vast majority, so 90% or above of emissions, with Scope 3 contributing with a very small fraction of the total carbon footprint, so approximately 4%. Instead, if we look at the other spectrum of this chart, if we look at sectors like as automotive or food industries, Scope 3 emissions can surpass 80% of the total emissions. The banking and financial services sector is another good example, as it has even higher Scope 3 emissions rate. Usually, these are well over 90% of the total of a bank's carbon footprint. So now let's look into what constitutes really Scope 3 emissions. So do consider this. So we have here in this chart divided into upstream and downstream activities, but think about the core processes of an organization being placed in the middle, with emissions falling under Scope 1 and 2 in the middle. So you can place these core processes at the center of the page between upstream and downstream activities. So everything that is pre and post processing, basically, so what is happening either upstream or downstream is what falls under Scope 3 emissions. The greenhouse gas protocol that we've define and leverage into in our first webinar categorizes the Scope 3 emissions into different subcategories, 15 of them actually. So you can find from purchased goods and services, which basically includes emissions that are associated with the production of goods and services that are purchased by the organization. We can find capital goods, so emissions from the production of machinery or equipment or the infrastructure also that is purchased by the organization. We can find fuel and energy related activities. We can find transportation and distribution. We will find this category both in upstream and in downstream. So these are emissions basically associated with the transportation and the distribution of materials and products that from basically the suppliers or manufacturers to the reporting organization. But we also find categories such as business travel. So the emissions that are generated by employees traveling for business purposes, including air travel, ground travel, or accommodation, so the hotel stays. We find employee commuting as well. So basically all the emissions that are generated by the employees to travel to and from work, including, again, different transportation means. They can be their car or public transport or whatever other modes of transport. And again, upstream leased assets. So these are emissions which are associated with the production, transportation, and use of assets leased by the organization, such as buildings or equipment. And again, waste generated in operations, so emissions from waste management practices within the organization. So you can think of the disposal, the recycling, and the treatment of waste materials. Downstream, again, think of the end-of-life treatment of sold products. So the emissions that are generated by the disposal, again, the recycling or the treatment of products at the end of their life cycle. Again, we find downstream transportation. So again, it's basically the transportation and distribution of the products to customers or to the end users. We have processing of sold products. This category focuses on emissions that are associated with the processing or the transformation of the products that are sold by the reporting organization before they reach basically the end users. The use of sold products, this instead focuses on how the customers use the products sold by the organization, including the energy that they consume, the maintenance, and the end-of-life disposal. And then again, downstream leased assets, franchises, so the emissions associated with operations of franchise businesses or outlets owned by the organization. Investments, very, very relevant for the banking and financial services sector. So as you can see, these categories really cover the various indirect emissions associated with an organization's activities across the entire value chain. But also, I think they highlight the complexity of addressing, so many different categories effectively. So in the coming slides, Raghu will take us through some best practices, methodologies, challenges as well, into assessing and managing Scope 3 emissions. If there are no questions at this point, I would leave the floor to Raghu to take us through the technicalities of this challenging but very, very important activity that organizations actually need to look into in order to reduce their emissions effectively. Raghu, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And thank you, members, for attending the webinar. So now we have identified what are the Scope 3 emissions. So we are having some absolute numbers. So we need to calculate what is the GHG intensity of the absolute numbers we are getting from the various categories. So Scope 3, the emission calculation is nothing but having the activity data into their respective emission factor. Let's consider A and B will give the Scope 3 GHG impact of that. In this, the A, the activity will be different. It will be like supplier, spend-based or average data method. Upon the change of A, the B will also be changing. The emission factor will be changing. So first of all, a company is having their supplier emission factor figures and the number of product purchase. So they can just, the A will be the quantity of the material purchased and against the emission factor given by the companies or the suppliers. Since what are this is, the company or supplier is doing their own LCA or publishing the UPD reports, we can fetch the data and we can calculate the first one. And second is that during their ledgers, the company is maintaining a ledger of what are the things purchased and how much the quantity of this thing is purchased and the value. Now we are considering only the value part, and we are taking the emission factors for that value. So for a management consulting service, there is a LCA database for the spend. So we are just multiplying that A and B, and we are getting the spend-based emission figure. And then we are having the average data method. So it's like now we are not taking the value. The company is having the total number of goods purchased with respect to mass or unit or the total hours of work by the organization. So upon changing, and we are having the local emission factor or international emission factors, we are just multiplying it and we are getting the average data method. Hybrid is a bit of supply chain engagement will be there. So the organization will be contacting their suppliers, and suppliers are giving their scope 1, scope 2 base data and the raw material that is going into the data, and they will be calculating the emission factor for the goods they are purchased. And this is for the specific categories. We are going for scope 3 calculation. So then in some of them we will have a supplier data, and some of them will have a spend-based data. So it will be like combination of for some sub-50 metal we can calculate with supplier specific, and further we can go for a spend-based or average data method. For that matter, we will be having a scope 3 detailed scope 3 emission categories. And yeah, we have to understand what's the calculation need to be done. And there comes a problem. What are the problems in which will be happen during accounting the scope 3? So the first and foremost is availability of the internal as well as the external data. So it required a lot of work for compiling that internal data with respect to each and everything. So it's a waste, like you need to be compiling the waste data, not to be withdraw some of data. So every data need to be aligned, as well as the sub-layer specific or external data. So that's the biggest challenge in addressing scope 3 calculation part. And also with coming under the unclear understanding. So we are having the data. So in which category this data point is going to be, we are utilizing, whether it's going for a category 1 or 2 or 3. So how we are going to mapping that? That will be a most important another challenges. And followed by, since the organization value chain is a vast expanse thing, and more things are, which more and more data will be there, and upon arriving of the data, we need to be allocate specific resources for finding the respective emission factor or contacting your suppliers. So there will be a gap in this, and there are more resource and time allocation is needed for this scope 3 calculation. And next comes the biggest challenge is baseline selection. So yeah, now I'm a company, I'm going to start my scope 3 calculation. I'm now checking that, okay, for this year I will be going with scope 1, scope 3 category 1 and scope 3 category 3 and 4. And you are setting a baseline. But upon coming years, you are refining your methodology and you are changing your baseline year. So there will be a rebaselining work need to be done. And in SBTI, more than 70% of the already declared targets, they have rebaselined their thing. The most important way due to the challenging in changes in their methodology, wrong calculation methods, as well as the changes in the respective emission factor. And then comes the peer benchmarking. So companies, I am calculating, so there are two companies in the same industry. I am calculating 4 to 5 categories, and my peer is calculating only 3 categories in scope 3. So I don't have a specific understanding of what is my emission and what is their emission. I can't go for apple to apple. Okay, this is my emission, this is this emission. I need to be control my emission, or they need to control their emission. So there's a lack of peer benchmarking due to the methodology changes. Since it's a time for a poll, shift and
Thanks for that insightful information, Raghu. So we have a poll. We've just launched a poll, if you can see it on your screen. Does your company calculate scope 3 emissions? I would want everyone to just take a quick moment to vote either yes or no, and we'll move ahead from here and also probably talk about how to go. So I think we can move ahead for now, Raghu. So for the poll that we just launched, does your company calculate scope 3 emissions? As of now, majority of the people have voted no. So they do know for sure that, they don't calculate these emissions. So I'm pretty sure that in the coming slides, we'll be able to discuss more on, how all companies can better implement their scope 3 managing targets. Raghu, on to you.
Thank you for the insight. And so in the previous slide, we have addressed what is the scope 3 categories and how we are going to calculate it, and what are the challenges in scope 3 calculation. So why we are calculating the scope 3 means we are going to set some target for reducing as per the Paris conference for limiting our temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the target setting is, we have a lot of target setting methodologies. It will be like NDC targets, where a whole company, whole nation is testing their targets. So we can align our target to that. And next will be the industrial bodies you are associated with can also come out with some targets. Like IMO, International Maritime Organization, they are coming out with their own set of targets. And other approved methodologies by SBTi. SBTi is nothing but a science-based target initiative, where more and more companies are putting their target reduction setting. It is validated by a set of scientists over there, whether it is possible and how they are going. They will mapping how they are going to reduce that also. And yearly audit will also be taking places. So as per SBTi requirement, if a company's total scope 3 emission is 40% of the total emission, they need to be setting their scope 3 targets. Okay, now I'm going to set a target. So what are the approach I'm going to take? In that, SBTi has for scope 3 specifically, they have coming around 5 points for target settings, 5 methods of target approach. So first will be the absolute contraction method. The absolute contraction method is nothing but I am baselining emission, and I am going to fix a target while upon coming years, regardless of my total production capacity or my company growth in terms of value, my emission is going to be reduced in an absolute terms. Considering I am going to reduce as a 4 degree year on year. I'm not considering I am going to increase my production to double-fold or my economy is going to increase by triple-fold. I'm not considering that. I am considering in absolute terms, my emission is going to reduce. And then come the intensities-based targets. So there are two intensity-based targets. One is that physical, another one is to the economic intensity. So physical intensity is nothing but the production output. What is the emission for the production output, and economic with respect to the how much revenue I'm generating, and for that revenue, how much is the CO2 footprint of my. So in a typical SBTi scenario, if you're considering a 2020 as a baseline, 7% I need to be set as a baseline for the reduction target. And for the upcoming years, it will be changes according to the target baseline year you are setting. And then comes the sectoral decarbonization method. So there are a specific sector. If you have already seen that the sectors such as cement, steel, automobiles, and food industry are having the highest emission in terms of scope 3 as well as scope 1 and scope 2. So SBTi has come up with a detailed emission projection for the industries such as aluminum, steel, maritime industries, transportation goods, and everything. We can use that methodology for setting our targets. That's called the sectoral decarbonization approach. How it's mapped is, so up to 2020, SBTI has mapping what is the total output respect to that sector and what the emission need to be in that sector if we need to tackle the temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And these are the quantitative days. And another thing is the qualitative thing. So qualitative, like you are going to engage your supplier in this whole exercise. Since scope 3 is going, everything is be a indirect and mostly your suppliers will be a part. So in this supply chain engagement, you are asking your suppliers that I am setting this target. I will be educate you. I will be implementing this target for you. And I will be helping your company how that can be achieved. So it's not like you are telling a supplier that this is my target. You are just helping them to understand, as many of the suppliers will be SME sectors. So the company will be like engage with the supplier, know how they are doing, what's the best practice for them to cut on their emission, and it need to be tracking their progress on time. So this is about the target setting for scope 3. Okay, we have considering the targets of scope 3, but there comes the challenges in setting the scope 3. This is one of the survey taken by SBTI to the organization who are committed. And the first and foremost, low confidence. Okay, I am in the methodology of above, I am setting my targets in absolute time reduction or in physical intensity. But delivering that target is what I am facing most of the challenges. I'm unable to confident that I can achieve it in the given period of time. That's one of the target setting challenges. Followed by, since you have considered there are 5 methods, this is not like I'm an aluminum industry, and whether I need to go for SDA or I need to go for intensity based target, or I need to go for absolute reduction. So SBTI has not given that this industry need to be fixing this target. So there is confusion. So which is the best suited for my industry to go on for a net zero roadmap or reduction in target setting of my scope 3 emission? And then comes as per SBTI, you need to be cover 67% of your emission in scope while setting a target for scope 3. So what I need to be understand what the 67%, whether I need to be putting on this category 1, 2 or 3, or I am going for category 4, 5, that thing need to be understand. And there are also coming the challenges in company. So I am having a target, and which are category I am going to incorporate in that target. And then comes the requirement. So you need to list out actually I have mentioned, we have a lot of requirement from the SBTI for the target setting. Company are unclear. Okay, I don't know which methodology I'm going to reduce the target. I don't know what are the coverages, scope 3 coverages I'm going to take in for calculating the target. So that is also be another challenges which facing by half of the companies around that. And then comes the resource part. So anything we are going to set a target, there comes a lot of paperwork, a lot of auditing, lot of calculation to be done in back end. So so it will be taking a lot of time, research of the available technology for target setting, whether we can achieve this. Everything will be most of a problem for the companies that limited time and resource. And another point is the understanding by the leadership team. So I am going to set a target. If there is a lack of understanding from the leadership team on target setting, and I'm setting a target, that will be coming, and the target setting will also not going to be a super clean one. So that will be coming into picture in this. So leadership also plays an important role in scope 3 target setting part. So okay, I have addressed all the challenges, and I am now implementing my scope 3 target reduction target to the suppliers and everyone. I will pass on the information. Okay, I am here. I have set my targets. and I am passing my information to my suppliers. There also comes the challenges. Okay, I am like I'm having a target and I am passing it to supplier, whether the supplier is utilizing that target and they are in that track. So first thing will be the first and important thing where 80% of the company is addressing it, influencing their whole supply chain emission factor is category 1. They have little or lesser impact on their supplier, but they are the main source of their business to run. They are providing their raw material, they are giving their services, and they are giving their machineries for operation. Implementing reduction target over the suppliers is the main challenges for most of the businesses out there. And the cost associated with the decarbonization strategies. So nothing can be come with the free, but companies are needed to spend a large portion of amount in decarbonization procedures, which will be on the initial it will be a large amount, but on a going time it will be beneficial for both the companies as well as suppliers. Since the energy efficiency target for a company will come at an increased cost, but upon implementation, the OPUS will be going to be reduced, and that can be implemented in the cost of the product the supplier is going to be considered, and that also financial that investment is going to be a burden for companies. And then the another thing is how I'm going to influence my end users. So behavioral change. I'm not delivering that. Okay, I'm going for a supply chain and reduction target, and I am just mailing to every individual. So this is the target to my customers. It's not going to be happen. So it's going to be a company's return educational practice to our customers, consumer for a responsible consumables. That will be that challenges where 60% of the organization can be coming around. And another comes, so scope 3, as you already know, scope is indirect emission, and the organization, it's outside their whole organization boundary of the organization. So monitoring their progress constant issue. Since your company have more or around 200 to 500 suppliers over there, so I'm going to track their information. I'm going for this suppliers or I'm going for that suppliers. So that will be a problem for them. And another comes up. And in scope 3, you are having a 15th category investment portfolio where 90% of the emission on scope 3 for FIS and banks will be from the investment portfolio. So it's like you can't simply say, I will be not finding this or I will not funding that project. So because the funding will be taken around in a multiple approach by considering the economics of the company, economics of the whole country. So the companies are still finding difficult for reducing their investment due to reducing the emission from investment. And then comes the limitation availability of technology availability. As the concept of green energy or clean energy is coming up, the availability of technology is not I can go to the supplier and I am going to fetch them. The technology is still in maturity phase, or some is just now mature. So the availability in every geography, it need to be a lot of time consuming resource for organization to look out the possible options. And then comes the downstream business transportation, as already Jessica mentioned. Out of the 7 categories, it will be causing a lot of effect, and as well as challenges in addressing each and every reason. It will be like a downstream transportation or asset or investment, everything. And another thing is, I'm an organization set up that if each and every organizational is know what I am going to deliver, it's like passing on information from top level to the bottom level. If that chain is breaks, the company will find difficulty in addressing their scope 3 emission level. So it's like the leadership need to be aware of this target, and they need to be possibly need to be giving the directions for the employees to be considered favorably considering that. And then what definitely comes to scope 3 target reduction. So let us take a scenario. I'm using a lot of fossil fuel vehicles. I'm switching it to EV without considering investment of renewables. Taking from grid, which is having only carbon intensive electricity, then the cost of then it's not going to be affect my scope 3 reduction, as the upstream and upstream emission of the electricity is going to happen in my scope 3 reduction. These are the challenges which is mainly addressed while delivering the scope 3 targets. So now we have seen about the challenges in the calculation, the challenges in the calculation, what is target setting approach, and the challenges in target setting, and what the challenges in delivering the scope 3 reduction. So now we are going to do about where I can definitely find the emission sources or the data I need to be populated into a GHG emission portfolio. So these are the 15 categories we have mapped, and that sourcing and data source are not statics. It will be dynamic upon organization and organization. These are the most prominent data owners and sourcing what we'll do in our assignment as well. Yeah, but it will be changing according to the industries we are going to calculate. So first and two, category 1 and 2, whether we are going to having the invoice, GLs, everything, and the data owners probably will be the procurement team will be looking after that. Followed by the fuel and purchase order where it will be we are calculating the direct emission in scope 1 and scope 2. We are just calculating the upstream by this in scope 3. And upstream transportation for the goods that coming into our factory, that will be taken care of by the procurement and team and the logistics team, where it will be tracked by the fleet management software or the gate process, everything. And during the waste generation in operations, that can be tackled out by the sourcing methodology of by the housekeeping team. They will be directly collecting the scrap details, the scrap sales, and the disposal mechanism they had to be. And business and the next will be the business and will be coming to the HR department, where they will be having their travel management desk. They will be having all the business travel details, and also as well as the employee community can taken by the survey. Upstream lease set and downstream lease set and in franchise investment, that can be everything will be given by the asset management team, or which can be maintained by the finance team, and downstream will be maintained by the logistic team, and fleet management will be there. And processing as tooled, use of tooled, and end of treatment of the goods will be like secondary research, customer survey, and also the market analysis how our product is disposed or used will be done by the R&D team or ESG team and the production team. And these are the data sources where we can get that scope 3 emission, and we can calculate the scope 3 emission. And then comes up pool. Shiv, can you take them?
Thank you for the insights, Raghu. So we have a next poll that you should be able to see on your screen. So what are your key challenges in measuring the scope 3 emission? Jessica, based on the polls that I'm seeing here for our specific audience batch, 75% have limited access to data, and about 50% are unclear, that they don't understand the data points and how to properly utilize them. Time and resource allocation is definitely an issue. So I think based on this, what do you have to say here?
Yeah, no, definitely these are the core challenges that we have been witnessing as we engage with different types of organizations in this region. These are the very same set of challenges that we are trying to solve, again, trying to leverage artificial intelligence to really streamline a lot of these processes, which can be extremely time consuming for organizations. Oftentimes they don't have the resources, the skill sets within the organizations to really tackle these challenges, to really look into. Again, the data collection definitely is a major point. We've seen organizations trying to collect data for several weeks, if not months, and still having data gaps. So again, I think that's where automation technology can really help streamline and ease this process. Of course, being sure about the data points and being able to confidently not only report, but really use the data in order to develop a sound decarbonization roadmap is what organizations need to do in their net zero roadmap. And again, that's where we're trying to facilitate this entire process through technology and through a unified platform. So I mean, definitely the results of the poll resonate with our experience on the ground, and very happy to I'll answer any specific questions from the audience. We can possibly maybe recap some of the best practices in the next slide. So we've seen, of course, the various frameworks, the methodologies for assessing Scope 3 emissions. We've seen how to calculate, measure those emissions. We've seen very much, of course, the challenges associated to both the calculation and the management of Scope 3 emissions. And Raghu has already taken us through some very good examples of how to tackle those challenges. But here's just a recap of the main sort of best practices. Some of these are some of the tactics that we recommend organizations to implement when managing, in particular, Scope 3 emissions. So these range from innovating, of course, business models. What does it mean? It means, for example, integrating an internal carbon pricing, or developing the product so to extend its lifespan, or again optimizing internal processes. Also very critical, as we have seen, it is effectively engaging with the suppliers. So a lot of these emissions come, of course, across the supply chain, the entire value chain, and being able to effectively onboard suppliers on your decarbonization journey, influencing their climate action. So the supplier's climate action journey and plan is critical in order to really bring down those emissions. Also very, very important is to develop very sound and effective procurement policies that can help organizations prioritize low carbon suppliers and facilitate also the journey of suppliers through this process. Again, another best practice is definitely rethinking and redesigning products or services, considering from the very beginning factors like circularity. So how can your product fit into a more circular model? How can you improve the energy efficiency? How can you extend the life cycle of your product? Again, we've talked about how emissions, Scope 3 emissions tend to grow when it comes in particular to organizations that work in sectors very close to the end consumer side of things. So we've seen that the use of products and services by the consumer really contributes to an organization's emissions. So educating customers about how to best utilize, your products or services in order to keep, the emissions on the lower side of things, it's very, very important. So there are several best practices, again, with policies, investment strategies, especially when it comes to the BFSI sector. And there's definitely a lot to do. we have been consulting clients with these best practices, and we have been integrating this in our system as well. So while this might feel overwhelming, I would like just to take a few moments to highlight that there are solutions out there in the market that leverage technology, that leverage artificial intelligence to make this process actually doable, feasible. Raghu, if you can maybe turn on the next slide very briefly. Shiva, at the beginning of the presentation, shared a few other recognitions that we received from the likes of BCG, PwC, and Deloitte lately, and we're now part of the Google for Startups accelerator program because of the way in which basically we leverage artificial intelligence to help organizations tackle all the challenges that we've seen, including for Scope 3 emissions. Zero, for example, basically helps organizations navigate through all the complexities of greenhouse gas emissions, from management, from accounting, from up until decarbonization, including Scope 3 emissions and supply chain engagement. So if you turn to the next slide, please. Happy, of course, to take this offline with anyone interested, but if you're still trying to figure out how to set your net zero targets, including your Scope 3 emissions, the tool has the capability to really guide you through this process in a seamless way. You can decide whether or not to follow the SBTi targets or set your own custom decarbonization goals, following all the methodologies that we've seen, again, looking at either absolute or intensity reduction, or again, the suppliers' engagement as well when it comes to Scope 3 emissions. Next slide, please, Raghu. Again, we've seen that some of the key challenges that are really some roadblocks in the process that organizations face in their Scope 3 measurement and reduction is the development of a sound decarbonization roadmap. They don't know maybe the technological readiness of a certain emission reduction activity or the cost associated with the same. That's where through AI we really drive action. We provide lots of intelligence on the available options. So again, on the technological readiness front of things, but also we share information on how economically viable certain decarbonization actions are for organizations. So we provide marginal abatement costs and a full repository of decarbonization levers, that is actions that each organization within its specific industry can actually implement in order to bring down those emissions and achieve the targets that are set. Next slide, please. While doing this, as we discussed today, engaging the supply chain is crucial. So that's why we have developed an entire module to streamline and to automate this process of supply chain engagement so that you can seamlessly onboard your dozens or hundreds or thousands of suppliers. We help you identify the suppliers that contribute the most to your emissions and then onboard them automatically on the platform in order to gather the data from them directly for improved accuracy, but also onboarding them on your decarbonization journey. So the tool helps you analyze and rate your suppliers, again, helping you taking the best decisions when it comes to whom to engage with across your supply chain, keeping in mind your decarbonization targets and goals. Next slide, please. What are the key details required from the suppliers to report
Scope 3 emissions.
Scope 3 emissions. So I'm not sure if I get it correct. So basically, suppliers should provide their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So whenever we onboard suppliers, we ask them basically to share whether or not they have been assessing their carbon footprint, whether or not that carbon footprint has been basically sort of verified by a third party. So if it's sort of, it has been audited. And then if they have any decarbonization or net zero goals in place. Raghu, I don't know.
May I jump in? Jessica here to respond back to
hi,
this.
Vivek.
Hi, everyone, and thanks a lot, Raghu and Jessica, for taking us through this. So yeah, I mean, the question is very specifically, what do we need from the supplier? While the business is calculating its Scope 3, they need to really map all their suppliers against the supplies that we are purchasing or procuring for them, be it products, be it machineries, items, or probably services. When it comes to really calculation of businesses' Scope 3, what you very specifically need is your suppliers' Scope 1 and Scope 2. As Jessica mentioned, that it could start from they directly providing you some certified emissions, Scope 1 and 2 from their businesses. But in cases where you don't have that data available with them, what they can directly do is provide their energy consumption in form of direct energy consumption in form of either electricity, or probably if they are consuming any other fuel as such in the process, that they can provide that level of detail. So it boils down to either providing the primary energy consumption at the supplier site, or if they have their emission number at best, that they can provide it. The third option, of course, is that they provide some certified reports if they are already ahead in their climate journey. Given the scenario where we work in, sometimes the supplier doesn't have this data. Sometimes they don't have emission data, but not even emission data, even providing energy consumption data, it's difficult for them. In that scenario, how basically we fill this data gap is with the help of peer benchmarking. So say you are buying coal from some supplier in some part of the world. So, and that particular, assumingly in that case, this supplier doesn't have their emission data or not able to provide you the energy consumption data, then probably the best way, alternate way, which GHG protocol or other measures suggest, is to look at peer benchmark data. In that scenario, we look out for other regional providers and look at their emission data or energy consumption data and come up with a very close estimation of what the emission that you can associate with that particular supplier who is not able to provide any data. So that is what we do in case of any support that we provide to our customers. But on top of that, our platform has got exhaustive database of close to 55,000 companies in the region and beyond, by which, if in case there is a data gap, we always fill it up with the most accurate approximation next to the supplier data. So that's how we typically deal with the situation.
Thank you
Thanks,
for that.
Vivek. So this was Vivek Tripathi, who is our CEO and co-founder. Thank you for joining the conversation. I hope the question was answered, but let us know if you still have any doubts around this methodology.
We would like to extend a heartfelt thankful to everyone for attending. And before we part ways, I'd just like to mention that we will be sharing a survey and the webinar resources with you in the coming days. We would just want you to take some time out and fill that out so we know the next piece of information or the challenges that actually bothers the business processes. So we can actually account for that and kind of go ahead in those lines and talk more about those things. So feel free to do that. Additionally, we will also provide you with definitely the presentation from today's webinar and also with a recording of the session. So these resources are intended to further your understanding and serve as a reference as you implement the strategies and insights discussed today. Do keep an eye out for our upcoming webinars on your email and on our LinkedIn company page as well, as we have a lot more planned for you in store. Thank you.